Hi, Dina from Geekella here, and today I want to go over some very basics of watercolor essentials. So what are the essential materials that you need to get started in watercolor, and then maybe what are some kind of nice to have next things to buy once you have the essentials. So let's jump into a few of the things that I think you definitely need to get started in watercolor, and the first thing is going to be your watercolor paint. And you do have a few different options on how you want to purchase your paint. Paint does come here in pans like this. Typically, watercolor is sold in either half pans or full pans. So these little pans right here are a half pan. These are Winsor & Newton Codman paint. And then the other side of this, on this side, are actually ones that I purchased that came in a tube. And when they come in a tube, you can choose to either use the paint straight from the tube or squeeze them out into empty half pans and put them in some sort of palette like this. So here's another example of a set of half pans. These came together in a set of kind of already dried in the pans and has some mixing areas. So you do need something to mix your watercolor in. If you get one of these kind of travel style palettes, they usually have some mixing areas. I also have a porcelain mixing tray like this. Artists tend to prefer porcelain. You can even use something like a dinner plate from, a thrift store or something, as long as it's this nice ceramic material. The paint is very smooth on here versus, if you notice, on a plastic palette, the paint tends to kind of bead up and form kind of difficult to work with, like poolings of paints, where porcelain, the paint is going to be much smoother. The other thing you can do if you don't want a travel palette is I like to use the studio palette. This one is one that lives on my desk, and I've shown it before, but this would be something quite large that you have all your paint squeezed into, you have your mixing areas, and it's customizable where you can kind of add these full pan size watercolors around to have all of your watercolors in one place. Now you definitely do not need this many colors if you are getting started. Definitely recommend, if you're getting started, to start with kind of your primary colors, a yellow, a red, a blue, and then kind of branch out from there. And if you do want to buy individual watercolors, maybe look at the types of colors that come in a set and work from there. So just looking at this set, this top row here is what came in the set. We have a nice lemon yellow and then a deeper yellow, and then kind of like a yellow ochre, a warm red and a cool red, a warm brown and a cool brown, a cool green, a warm green, a cool blue, a warm blue, and black. So generally, you'll kind of see a cool and warm version of each color, and then maybe something like a black, or typically not a white. I think this set actually came with white, and I didn't use it, so I took it out. But yeah, that's the basics of paint. So the next thing that you're going to need are some paint brushes. Now you can get very in-depth with each of these kind of categories of materials. We're just looking at basics today. So for brushes, I typically like round brushes or these quill type brushes for watercolor. This is my favorite brush. It is a round brush. And this one is red sable. So this is a natural hair brush. You see that they're quite soft. And these brushes hold a lot of water. Now this quill brush is squirrel hair, and you see it is extremely soft. And again, this holds a lot of water, which is what you want in watercolor. You can get synthetic brushes that also hold a lot of water. So natural brushes are going to be a lot more expensive typically. But this is a synthetic hairbrush, and it's also very soft, and it also holds a good amount of water. So you don't have to go with natural. You can find pretty good synthetic brushes that also hold a lot of water. Typically what you want in watercolor is a brush that is very soft like this. It almost feels like a makeup brush, versus something like this is what you would maybe use in like oil painting with very stiff brush fibers. So we wouldn't really want this in watercolor. Sometimes we can use this for like some dry brushing effects. But if you had to buy just one brush to start, I would buy like a medium size round brush. So this is like a size 6. This one came in a set that was like $10. I think this one came with it and a few others. But something that's a medium size round brush is going to, let you do entire paintings with just that one brush. I also recommend having in your kind of brush arsenal a pencil, doing light sketches. Something like this that has a decent eraser is good. I try not to erase on watercolor paper because it can damage the paper, but a pencil is good, as well as a waterproof pen. So if you want to do anything with ink in watercolor, you do need a watercolor or waterproof pen. So look for a pen that does have waterproof ink. So we have paint, we have brushes. You do need water for watercolor. Most artists typically use 2 water jars, one for clean water and one for dirty water. So as you're painting, every time you want to switch colors, you're going to rinse off your paint or brush in the dirty water cup, and then you'll dip it into the clean water cup before picking your new color. So that way your colors are going to stay vibrant and not mix when you don't want them to mix together. So now, one of the most important things in watercolor may not seem like the most important. It seems like the paint is the most important, but probably the thing that's going to make the biggest difference in your artwork is the paper. So let's talk a little bit about some of the main types of paper. So when you have watercolor, the main thing you're going to pay attention to is the press of the paper, as well as what the paper is made out of. And those two things are going to greatly affect the results you get from that paper. So this is hot press paper. You can see that it is very smooth, versus cold press paper is generally preferred by most watercolor artists. And this is going to be textured. You can kind of see a little bit here that this paper has some texture to it. Generally, this is going to hold that paint better and give us some better effects of watercolor. Or with the hot press paper, I find that the paint kind of sits more on top of the paper and is really good for bright, detailed work, where the textured watercolor tends to be better for very wet applications. Now, also the paper material matters a lot. The best types of paper you can get for watercolor are going to be 100% cotton paper. I also prefer to work with paper that is 300 grams per meter squared or 140-pound paper. This is going to be like the thickness of like a heavy cardstock. This is cold press, so you're going to see that it does have that texture we were talking about. And that cotton paper is going to hold on to that water very well, soak up that water, give you beautiful wet on wet effects, and just work better typically, versus paper that's made out of wood pulp. So some of the cheaper papers that you might see are going to be mixed media paper. These tend to be a lower weight. This one's only 90 pounds. And it's going to be a lot thinner, not have that texture we like for watercolor. I think I just have like a couple of things in here, older things, and we can kind of see that it's really difficult to get smooth transitions of color, and our paint is going to sit more on top of the paper with this wood pulp paper. They do sell a watercolor paper, but this is a thicker paper, but so this is a little better. It is advertised as cold press, but this is still going to be that wood pulp paper, so like traditional paper. So while it has a nice texture, we can get nice paintings on this. It's not going to hold on to our water as well and have as smooth of transitions of color. So I just want to flip up a sketchbook that I have. And I painted this one in a course I took. And we can see that this is with that Canson watercolor paper. We still can get some nice effects here with the wood pulp paper. But when we're using that 100% cotton paper, we're going to have much better results. Here's another one on this thin paper. You can kind of see the paper does warp and buckle a lot more on this thinner mixed media paper. So this is going to be maybe good for a beginner, good for things like sketches, but not really good for like finished work. Let me see if I have an example painting on 100% cotton paper handy. So this one here was done on 100% cotton paper. I definitely had some very wet on wet, some parts where I was really scrubbing my brush on the paper, and our paper was not damaged in that. This is very thick paper, and it can hold up to a lot of water and a lot of working, a lot of layers of paint, where something that's more wood pulp paper does not hold up as well to the layers of paint. So paint, water, brushes, paper, those are your main supplies. A couple of other nice to have things would be a spray bottle. The spray bottle is great for spraying either onto your paper to pre-wet your paper, to spray onto areas and get interesting effects on making the paint move. And it's also really good for pre-wetting your paint. So before you start painting, spraying your paint so that the surface of the paint is already wet and it's much easier to grab beautiful saturated color. I always find that extra mixing trays are very helpful. I kind of already talked about this mixing tray. I also have some small ones like this. It is really helpful to have lots of space to mix your colors. I also think it's helpful to have something like a binder clip or something to clip your book open if you're working in a book. So if you're working more in like a sketchbook like this, you can kind of see here that if I want to paint on this page, this is kind of flapping up. So I like to use something like a clip, binder clip or something to hold my book open while I'm working in a sketchbook. So that's just another thing that's not essential, but it's nice to have. Sketchbooks in general are going to be things that are really good. You know, obviously you want to do your finished work kind of on watercolor pads or blocks. If you're not familiar with a watercolor block, these are very nice because you can paint directly on here. The paper is glued on the edges, so the other paper is not getting kind of messed up when you're painting. Versus if you're working in a watercolor pad, you do like rip out each page as you're painting. Sketchbooks in general are nice to have as well. I like the ones that have the closure like this so that the paper stays relatively flat. And these are just really good to do practice. I enjoy doing like drills and stuff in these versus trying to do like finished pieces. These are great places to warm up and feel a little more free as you're painting versus feeling like, you know, you're doing something that has to be like showcased on the wall. I like the books for my own kind of personal journey. So those are the main essentials that you need to get started in watercolor. Please reach out if you have any questions.